has taken a human form, but he has so much to learn about being human. He thought he was an invited guest, but he wasn't. He has only 3 days to find his mother's ship. 3 days to live and learn if we let him. John Carpenter's Starman, the science fiction love story. Rated PG. Starts Friday at a theater near you. Check newspapers.
Welcome back to a brand new episode of ReconCinemation. I'm your host, John Diner.
I'm David Munchak.
I'm Brett Hutchins.
And this is the podcast that takes a look back at some of our favorite films from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We're checking out how they hold up today, and another exciting episode here. We are returning to the JCCU. That's right, the John Carpenter Cinematic Universe, with a look back at Starman. Very exciting. Yeah, Starman.
Super exciting.
It is.
Every time you say JCCU, though, I just feel like I'm supposed to be going to my friend's Jewish Community Center. So it throws me for a loop a little bit, but I love it. The JCC and the JCCU are both awesome.
Yeah.
Where I come from, I think it's a Jesuit community center. So
is that right?
Okay. Yeah. So,
we can combine all those things.
The JJCCs, Jewish and Jesuits, Jewish and Jesuits Community Center of America.
Well, in order to do this, we needed yet another super special guest to return to the show. We're calling back our resident Carpenter aficionado. It's Blake Fichera from Scored to Death and Saturday Night Movie Sleepovers.
Thank you.
Right.
Welcome
Always
back,
happy.
sir.
Always happy to be here.
Yes, he's here.
Good to see you again.
Thank you,
Always
sir.
up for talking Carpenter.
Yeah. It's you're an expert. So anytime we talk Carpenter now, we feel like we need to have your presence. So
I don't know if I'm an expert. There's a lot of experts now.
you're amongst them. You're
You're the elite.
You're our expert.
There's so much love of John Carpenter. You know, I know we brought it up before, but it's been really fascinating over, I don't know, the last 10 years, maybe a little bit more, of, you know, this huge wave of this rediscovery of a lot of his movies, and, you know, definitely a lot of, you know, filmmakers who've come up in the business and are now at a point of making their own films, whether they're studio people or directors or writers, that were heavily influenced, you know, a lot of them from our generation, heavily influenced by your Halloweens and your Escape from New Yorks and your Things and Big Troubles. And it's really, I think it's just awesome that he's gotten so much love over the last handful of years, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably more popular now than he ever was. I mean,
Yeah.
especially since he started doing the music stuff. But the internet kind of changed how everybody watches movies, learns about movies, communicates with others about movies. And it is very strange to be like our age and then go on social media and realize that, like, I don't know, we're not special anymore. You know, like all the stuff that we were the only people that loved it, or you only knew like a handful of other people that loved it, something that we bonded with like our best friends over.
Yeah.
Because it was us against the world. Now it's like everybody seems to love it.
I
There were
remember
just
when
more
I had
pockets of your people that you didn't that we didn't know about until the internet.
I know. It just
Because those fans, that's regional, right? It's in your area. It's where you grew up, and like pre-internet and all that stuff. And then like, oh, maybe there's like a little con that's happening at the Holiday Inn, and someone's going to be there, and it's like the local group, the local fans will go, but those local fans are in every region. So, you know, it's just no one had the ability to talk to each other for a long time.
But it also made the ability to talk to each other online that's true, but it also just made things easier to access too. So
Sure.
where like discovering like Italian horror movies in the mid to late 90s was like, a archaeological dig through.
Yeah, it was a rite of passage for zombie fans
through video stores and conventions and stuff like that. Now it's like everything's at everybody's fingertips. So everything's available now too, which is the other part of it. Not just finding the other people that love it, but now it's for the people that are being introduced to it. It's so much easier to access. So it's just like, I feel like it's just like that community just grows faster and bigger than ever before.
Yeah, it's easier to access everything except Cocoon. That's all.
That's the hardest one. But
that's the most tricky one.
What the hell?
I remember in high school when I was really into my Laserdisc collection, and I got Escape from New York on Laserdisc, and it had the commentary, but also the a couple of those deleted scenes, and it was like a gold mine. None of my friends had even seen Escape from New York, period, and were so fascinated with it. And it was like in my little town, Somers in New York, like nobody knew about John Carpenter. A couple people had seen The Thing. They knew about Big Trouble, but that was it, and of course Halloween. But some of the other stuff, it was like I felt like I was showing all of these people for the first time, and now it's so hard to find that anymore.
For anybody who's listening, don't be fooled. John's still really into his Laserdisc collection.
This is true.
It wasn't just in high school.
Let's stop pretending.
Yeah, come on.
Can I talk about the Godfather saga again? Do I need to get into that? They're good. The quality's still good. But Starman was a movie that I really never saw. I remember glimpses of it. I remember shots of the end, the end sequence, and those colorful, the blue and the red lighting, and I remember that. But I used to mix it up with another Charles Martin Smith movie, Never Cry Wolf. I don't know why. Maybe they came out. Maybe I kind of saw both around the same time when I was a kid, but I used to confuse the two. But so this is basically a first time watch for me.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
What about you guys?
All
Blake, when was the first time you got turned on to Starman?
I mean, it was probably a new release on video. My parents were divorced, and my dad had this crazy thing that you would go to Rite Aid and rent these tapes and then go home and you could watch them. And that's how I saw. I'm sure. Did I talk Christine with you guys?
Yes.
I can't remember. I probably told the story about renting Christine. My dad is like very much not a horror fan now, but he does not realize that he was largely responsible for my love of things like The Thing and Christine and all that stuff. But I remember watching it as a kid. So we must have been like 85. And because I remember just like not like one being like mesmerized by like the like Jeff Bridges becoming Jeff Bridges, the Dick Smith special effects, not fully understanding what was happening, because I was, I don't know, 7, 6 or 7.
Yeah.
So I always remembered it because of that. And I always remembered the music. And then when I was in high school, we had a photography classes, and the guy who taught the photography classes was also taught like a video production class, like a movie class. And he decided not to do it one year. So they brought in this teacher from one of the junior highs who was very into movies to come in and teach it. And it was a lot of like watching movies. And I don't know if other high schools had this kind of thing, but we luckily we did. But for the most part, it was people that were just trying to, get grades for watching movies. But by that point, I was me and my friends made movies on weekends, and we had access to like a VHS to VHS editing deck at the school. And and I forget what the name of the computer was with the transitions. And so she was showing us all this stuff, which I didn't mind watching. I hadn't seen a lot of it. Like she was showing us like Fellini movies and stuff,
Wow.
but like my class just wasn't having it. Just was not into it at all. And I don't remember how it came about, but she finally just got like fed up with it. And she's like, I'm gonna bring in the list of movies I have, and you guys are gonna look through it and we'll just watch whatever the hell you want. Like she was just like, she had given up. So she brought in like this, like, booklet of printed out sheets with a list of movies. She had them all like listed. And she passed it around class. And somehow the movie that the class settled on was Starman. I don't know. I don't know why.
Wow.
How. I remember even at the time thinking that was really strange that like this was the movie that like the majority of the class settled on.
Did they think it was going to be like about something else, like more of like an action sci-fi kind of thing? Or
I have no idea. I have no idea what they were thinking and why I was certainly glad for it.
Yeah.
So I watched it then in class. The other, like the flip side of that, like the other story from that class was, it was the 90s. We were coming off of like the Tarantinos and whatnot, coming off of Goodfellas. And so I was like, somehow I brought up like we could, and the class was like, sure, let's watch Raging Bull. So we watched Raging Bull in class over like several days. And one of the day with like kind of like this quote unquote like sex scene in that movie with Kathy Moriarty and Robert De Niro, we had a substitute teacher.
Oh no.
And she was like, I'm turning this off, we can't watch it. And I thought we were gonna have like Lord of the Flies situation, like the class just like, this is what we're supposed to watch. They're just like girls like screaming at the substitute teacher. But those are the two stories I remember from that class. But Starman, yeah, and that was my second viewing of Starman. And then as I started to get into Carpenter, I watched it again. A few years ago, Brooklyn Academy of Music did a whole they also have a movie theater there. They did a full John Carpenter retrospective, showed all his movies. And I knew I couldn't go see them all, and nor did I really want to, because I wanted to see stuff that was being shown on 35 and not digital and all that stuff. But the three movies I decided that I had to see were Prince of Darkness, In the Mouth of Madness, and Starman. And so that was probably the last time I watched it, which was probably like 2016 or 17.
Okay. Yeah.
And I found it incredibly moving now, even more so than I probably did in previous viewings. And then I watched it today. So that's my complete history of Starman. I'll see you guys later.
That's a wrap. All right. Thanks for swinging by. No, that's awesome. Oh, I've seen this a couple times. Yeah, I saw this in the theaters back in the day. It was one of my theater experiences. This one is, I love this movie. It's I forget about it a lot. It like doesn't get a lot of the same kind of credit as some of the other Carpenter movies or some of the other kind of like sci-fi movies of the age, I guess. But for me, this is like squarely lives like in a kind of a self-imagined franchise of films that starts with Starman, and then the sequel is The Last Starfighter, and then the third movie in this is Enemy Mine, which if you guys haven't seen that, we should talk about it sometime. But yeah, I love this movie. It's great. I just don't watch it as often as I'd like. I saw it in the theater. I saw it a handful of times when I was a kid, and then sort of kind of forgot about it a little bit. And every so often, I'll remember it. Maybe I'll watch it again, but I probably haven't seen this in 15, 20 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Is the last time I saw it. But and I don't know, seeing it this time, like so I've done a lot of reflecting in my life and recently, and I've gone through and recounted like like what movies are the movies that influenced me so much as a child that got me to want to pursue this crazy career and do what I do. And E.T. is definitely, if not the top one on that list, it's at the very top. And so it wasn't until this viewing of Starman this time that I really pieced together how many parallels there are between Starman and E.T. But I just watched E.T. 2 weeks ago while playing the board game with my daughter. We were watching the movie at the same time because that's what kind of dorks we are. And so we did that and then just watched Starman, and I'm like making connections for things that aren't even really connections, but I'm like, nope, that's definitely like E.T.'s glowing heart when they're driving through on the double wide and the home window is glowing. I'm like, yeah, that's totally symbolic, but it's like there are so many parallels that I found in this one that kind of surprised me. But yeah, Starman's great. I'm glad that we're doing it because I hadn't seen it in a while, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Nice. Yeah, David, first time watch, second time watch, or seventh time watch?
What if I told you I've seen it 100 times?
I would love to hear
surprised.
that.
You continue to assume I've only seen movies the first time, or maybe second. But let's keep it open that anything is possible here. Now, all that said, first time was 2 days ago, and and boy, oh boy, what a journey it was. Well, and the funny thing is I didn't see it in the theater or whatever, but I'm I for years and years and years I confused Starman with Soul Man, the Thomas C. Howell.
I see the similarity
where he puts on blackface to get into college or something. And I thought these were the same movie. But they're not, apparently.
What if they were, though? What if they were?
Well, I was half hoping that would be the B subplot, like
both directed by horror movie directors. So
yeah.
Right. So yeah, Steve Miner directed Soul Man. So listen, like these are basically the same movie to me in my head, but I didn't see much of Soul Man either. So, but yeah, no, this was the first time to see it through and get to really know I don't know a young Jeff Bridges enough, so to add this to that to get to know his earlier career was a feast.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of airplay for a lot of the early Jeff Bridges stuff. I mean, Last Picture Show is Last Picture Show, but Against All Odds and The Morning After and like those kind of early 80s and late 70s things you don't really see very often, but it's really like Lebowski and Afterwards that's the Jeff Bridges that we know and is the popular one.
He became quite an icon with Lebowski and Beyond. So
yeah.
But it's Jeff Bridges, man.
Yeah.
He's getting sucked into video games and
oh yeah,
making
Tron.
road
I was going to say Tron. There's quite a following.
Tron's a big
for his early 80s stuff, but beyond that, like you're right, there's not a whole lot that sticks out. Sorry, I was going to say looking through his credits though, like earlier in his career, like seeing, Nadine, like I remember when that came out, Tucker, when that came out, Jagged Edge, like those were all pretty popular for the time, but they don't get a lot of talk, like none of those, they don't have the staying power of a lot of the later stuff, like Lebowski and things like that.
Well, it's like you got to have a movie that's embraced by like film schools, right? That's gonna that's where those are the movies that get shoved on the incoming, at least filmmaking community, and really a lot of those aren't. Not that they're bad movies, but
a guy I used to be friends with used to work in the program department of a movie theater in Westchester. That was like a nonprofit, so they showed a lot of art films and did like film retrospectives, and they did a Jeff Bridges retrospective, and they wanted him to come, do a Q&A and all that. So they sent him the list of movies that they were going to show, and he's like, "You're not showing Starman?" And they said, "No, we're not showing Starman." He's like, "Well, I'm not coming. We're not going to show Starman."
No shit.
Nice.
That's great.
So they ended up they couldn't get like a print of it. They ended up showing, I think they showed it like on VHS or like DVD or something. But like his demand was, "I'm not going to come unless you're going to unless you show Starman."
I mean, I think you have to. It's like that's the movie he got an Oscar nomination for, and he's so incredible in it. I mean, both of them. We'll come back to Karen Allen, but they're like he's so great in it. And why wouldn't you show that movie?
If you ever watched like the old episodes of the Inside the Actors Studio show, and every time they get to a movie with any actor being interviewed, they get to a movie that they were in with Jeff Bridges, they always say, "I learned more about acting from working with Jeff Bridges than I did like anywhere else." Like Robin Williams said it for the Fisher King. Like
Fisher King. Yep.
It was like it became like this motif every time they got to like a Jeff Bridges movie. The person would be like, "I learned more about the craft from working with Jeff Bridges."
Wow.
As a kid too, like pre-Lebowski, I was not into Jeff Bridges. There was something about him that like I just automatically assumed all his movies were going to be boring. I don't know why I thought that, but just as like a teenager, really. And so I stayed away from everything, I think, except Tron, maybe King Kong, until...
You didn't see like Blown Away or Fisher King or...
Nope.
I got mad love for White Squall. Like you didn't... None of those?
No, missed all of them. I'm like, Bridges, nope, I'm out. And then Lebowski hit, and I did a 180. And
well, you want to hear something like really crazy. My best friend in high school could not stand Kurt Russell.
Really?
Ooh, that's a gut punch right there.
This is where the color bars come up, and like we have stand by.
I need a minute.
We need to dox this person and then send some threatening things.
I haven't talked to him since high school, so I don't know where he stands on.
Good for you. That's the right move.
Good, that's exactly why
you broke up.
That's right.
The right move.
We're not talking.
Yeah. Wow, that's a bold stance, but. Maybe the hair was too intimidating.
That's too much.
It was.
He saw Tango and Cash. That'll get like, you. I can't handle this.
That hair is too big, and that's it. But Starman, I think of all the Carpenter movies from, his prime era, Starman doesn't get a lot of play either. The people that have seen it, everyone seems to love it, but it doesn't come up as often as, your Big Troubles and your Halloween things, Escape from New York's. Even They Live, I think, gets a more love than Starman does. But Starman it was so fascinating to me because I'm watching. I'm like, in a way, this might be like almost my favorite Carpenter movie now. Like I love this movie because it feels so. I don't know. It feels so. There's some genuine stuff rooted in it, specifically with Karen Allen and dealing with a real thing that like grief and loss, and we all go through that. And that opening scene of her, or not the opening scene, but the first time we see her, where she's watching those old film reels, like I felt like you could really feel her pain, and that's something that you don't always have in the other Carpenter movies, just because they're not set in reality like that they're just about other things, whether it's aliens or a killer or whatever, or it's fun like Big Trouble. So I don't know, that one just really had an impact on me this time.
Yeah, this one is sci-fi, which is similar to a lot of or fantasy like that Carpenter's done in the past, but it's rooted in human emotion, which is like not something you get a lot of in some of his other ones. This is much deeper than that, and so I mean, and the performances are powerful, like both are Karen Allen and Jeff Bridges are both really, really good in this. And like you're along for the ride, kind of seeing her dealing with her loss and him learning about, you know, like human emotion and empathy and things like that. And it has a real power to it that kind of grabs you and keeps you kind of, locked in.
Well, I think, what we lose sight of is that I don't think Carpenter ever really set out to be like a horror filmmaker. And I don't necessarily think he is, in my opinion. I mean, sure, like the movies he's most famous for are, but he's got action movies and science fiction movies. I don't think horror is really his thing. I think
Right.
even Halloween was a job for hire.
Yeah.
He was hired to make a movie about a killer and babysitters, and so he delivered that. When I know his son Cody a little bit, and talking to Cody, I asked Cody once what's your dad's, Cody's his son, and I said, what's your dad's like guilty pleasure movies? And he's like, Independence Day. He's like, anytime Independence Day, he'll watch Independence Day.
Nice.
That's hilarious.
Which makes sense when the second answer is that like any like 50 science fiction movie, like that's really where like his heart is like 50 sci-fi. And then you see some of that in They Live, and Prince of Darkness is very much like his ode to the Quatermass movies.
Mm-hmm. And the Thing,
and the Thing, which it's his version is very much rooted in horror. But yeah, I mean, he was obsessed with Howard Hawks, so The Thing was a big thing for him to do. And so I mean, I think in that way, Starman very much fits into like where I think like his heart is. But he's also like just like a classic filmmaker, I think, even in his own head. Like his heroes in filmmaking were guys like Howard Hawks and John Ford, and and so I think like doing a romantic comedy love story, a road movie, but also being able to put it, I don't even know if he would have cared whether it was a science fiction movie or not. I think he was given an opportunity and he wanted to take it. And the fact that it was science fiction probably made it seem like a not so crazy idea to have him do it on paper. And again, he very much considers it a work for hire, but it's a movie. It's one of the movies that he has said that he's most proud of. And so I think he got to, deal with a lot of different kinds of movies that he kind of grew up loving, or where his heart is. He's also very much a romantic, which you don't really get from anything. Every once in a while, I've seen him interviewed where it's like him and his wife, Sandy King, who he met doing this movie.
Yeah, she was a script supervisor, right? On this,
and now she's a producer, and he's very like lovey-dovey with her. You could just tell that he's like and the other thing is, if you read, I suggest this to any John Carpenter fan, is to read Adrienne Barbeau's autobiography, because there's several chapters about Carpenter because she was married to him, and the way she talks about him in that movie is in that book it's this like total like romantic, head over heels in love guy. So I think it's not so far-fetched when you start to you chip away at things and you find these little looks into more of what Carpenter is as a person and not a filmmaker, that you do see that he is very much a romantic and very much able to fall in love in like clearly like really like intense ways, and like not afraid to show it,
in a way that makes this like his perfect movie.
Yeah, kind of in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Well, that's as we continue to do more Carpenter movies, that's where I find myself, is like he likes telling stories of like human perseverance in a sense, but not like against insurmountable odds, but it's a sort of like humanity is always at war with itself in terms of like it's like your emotions, right? And like where you fall with things, and like are you going to be the good guy, or are you going to be the bad guy? And there's a lot of gray area, but ultimately, where's your morality? Where's your ethics taking you? And I think I think with everything, he's more or less optimistic. Like, but he in all of these different types of movies, whether it's like a straight up horror slasher or this romantic sort of like fish out of water, or or just fighting evil or fighting the bad guy, like there's an optimism to the whole thing. And like, so it's like he can do all of these kind of different movies. You wouldn't necessarily know, the uninitiated wouldn't know that the guy who did Starman did Halloween, like,
Yeah.
or it wouldn't, like, really.
Well, and
But
this is go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, David.
I think it's like he gets to continue to explore his themes of humanity, and I think that's like what most directors are, who have a story to tell. That's what you're doing, right? You're exploring your own humanity, or what you would view of a global humanity, and and you do it in your own way. It's like Christopher Nolan, like his thesis statements of all of his films are very basic, but they're so great that the films themselves are so grandiose in scope and scale because of budget and what you can do and visual effects. But like Carpenter was always doing the same thing, and countless directors are doing that same thing, that like exploration of humanity. And I think it's great to be able to like move out of like he doesn't live in one specific genre, I don't think.
Right.
And you mentioned, optimism. This is one of his most optimistic movies. I mean, this has, I mean, it's a bittersweet, but it is sort of a version of a happy ending, and it's maybe the only movie. I don't know about Memoirs of Invisible Man. I haven't seen that.
It's lovely. It's a lovely story.
But the last shot, so many of his films have that sort of like a really memorable last shot, and a lot of it is like leaning towards like doom is still coming, something bad is about to happen, or is still happening. Michael Myers is still on the loose, and the ending of They Live, the ending of Escape from New York, and the famous ending for The Thing. But this one is like just a beautiful shot of Karen Allen, like as she's just watching him, and instead of a hard cut to black, it's this slow dissolve, and it's just a softer. The whole movie is just a softer, more gentle approach, and it just felt so different. Like there's so much Carpenter in it, but yet it still felt so different to me.
Right.
I know we're deep into it already, but Brent, why don't you take us back? Why don't you rewind and take us back to 1984, December 84, and what was happening in the world back in December 84?
Oh, you want to hear about 1984, John?
I want to hear.
You want me to tell you a couple things about 1984? I can tell you about 1984, man. 1984. Let's see. Ronald Reagan was elected president for the second time. Hurrah for that, I guess, for some people. Mm-hmm.
Some people.
Space Shuttle Discovery successfully completed its maiden voyage, which was pretty awesome. And then we've talked about this a couple different times, but the Iran-Contra affair was kind of another big news article, but that was mostly going to unfold earlier in 1985. But the initial kind of breaking stories started happening in late 84. So, but let's see. Top 3 songs of the year were When Doves Cry by Prince, Like a Virgin by Madonna, and Wake Me Up Before You Go by Wham. In the NFL, the 49ers won the Super Bowl. The Detroit Tigers won the World Series. Celtics won the NBA championship. And the Edmonton Oilers won the Stanley Cup. And there were a ton of great movies in 84.
84 is a good year. It's not 82, but it's...
I don't know. Look, I know 82, everybody's all gooey for 82, but man, 84, you got Temple of Doom, Ghostbusters, Gremlins, Beverly Hills Cop, Karate Kid, Splash, Police Academy, The original Nightmare on Elm Street,
You
Terminator.
can just stop at Police Academy. That's
Never
all.
Ending Story, Red Dawn, The Natural. Like, come on, dude. Like, there's like this list goes on forever.
Yeah.
That is not all the movies. There are hundreds of movies that came out that year that are equally just as awesome as those that I just listed. So I'm sticking with 84 as quite possibly the best year in film history.
All right. I got to vote for 84.
Yeah, I'm into it. 84, pretty impressed.
It also marks the last album that Van Halen did with David Lee Roth, which is
right.
Very true.
Like,
called 1984. So
yeah, exactly. So many things happened in 84. George Orwell, 1984. Like, come on, you can't even. It's like,
yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Did David Lee Roth ever reunite with them? He had
did,
to, right?
Yeah, he did.
Except for they wouldn't let Michael Anthony, the bass player, back. For some
Yeah.
reason, Eddie was mad that he had continued to play with Sammy Hagar after they kicked Sammy out. But Michael Anthony's like, look, I need a job.
It's definitely no pettiness revolving around any of that.
So they brought in Wolfgang Van Halen to play bass. That was in the 2000s. I don't remember what year it was. But I'm Dave.
All right, David, why don't you, for those listening that maybe haven't actually seen Starman recently, can you give us a quick recap of it?
Sure, yeah. No, written by Bruce A. Evans and Reynold Gideon and Dean Reisner, and directed by John Carpenter. Starman follows the adventure of an out-of-this-world alien. Starman follows the adventure of an out-of-this-world alien who befriends a young widow by taking the physical form of her deceased husband, Scott. Now they'll have to avoid shady government authorities and scientists in the road trip of a lifetime to get this alien to his pickup point so he can finally go home. And along the way, the Starman learns from Jenny Hayden about the unique things that make life on Earth worth living. That's the movie.
My favorite part of the movie actually is just the fact that Ted White is in it, who also had Friday the 13th, the final chapter in 1984. So, and I think Romancing the Stone 84.
It is 84.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he had a trifecta.
That's a big year.
The year of Ted White.
Yes.
There's never enough Ted White.
Never.
Nope.
All right. So, okay. So you mentioned Bruce Evans and Reynold Gideon developing the script, and it's kind of tough that they end up getting sole writing credit for the movie, because it's my understanding that Dean Reisner really injected a lot of the, what we know and love about Starman was all from him. Blake, is that kind of your recollection?
Yeah, I mean, I know Carpenter has said that like a lot of the heart that's in the movie comes from him, and he did something like 9 drafts of it.
Yeah.
Oof.
With 6 different directors, supposedly.
Yeah.
Or a bunch of different directors. So.
But ultimately, the Writers Guild deemed that he didn't add enough to it to.
Right. So he didn't get any credit at all, or
no screen credit.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and he was a big writer at the time, and it's kind of a shame, but this was in development for like 5 or 6 years, and was one of those that just kind of sat there in kind of development hell at Columbia for quite a while. And they were also developing Steven Spielberg's Night Skies, which may be familiar to some of you. Brent, you remember
AKA E.T. the Extraterrestrial? Yeah, I've heard of that one.
So developing both at the same time, and Columbia ends up dropping Night Skies and sticks with Starman, which in the long run, I mean, Starman is we love it, and it's a great film. I wonder if they regretted it at the time they had to.
I don't know, right? Like, is E.T. without Spiel? Like every like.
Well, I feel like Spielberg was still attached to it. I mean, it was his project, but they just would have been. I don't know. They would have gotten all that money.
Yeah, but it may not have been E.T. I think is what.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it might have
true.
stayed
Yeah.
Night Skies.
exactly.
Not as catchy of a title,
No,
Um,
seems a little more superficial.
Yeah.
Night
Well, you
Sky.
always need like any of these great films, like you need that right concoction of creativity of the director and the studio who's either allowing them to make their movie or fighting against them, which is also helping them make that movie, uh, and the right group of people making it. So it all worked out for Mr.
Yeah.
Spielberg.
Need the right ingredients.
Yeah. A lot of different directors, like at one point attached to this movie. Tony Scott, Adrian Lyne, John Badham, Peter Hyams. All those guys are touching on it and involved in some capacity before it ends up back with Carpenter. I don't know what movie, like any of those directors, like it would have been a very different film in their hands.
Agreed. I was just trying to think of that list, and I'm like, would any of those directors have come close to what we got? And the answer is no. I don't think
Well,
so.
it's also because you have to take into account that, like each one of those directors and however many directors, like they each, like Dean Reisner did like new drafts, including like the stuff that Carpenter wanted, like he was changing the movie for every, director. I think it's also worth noting that like it was, it was like purchased by Michael Douglas in like the mid to late 70s.
Yeah.
And that's like how it got like off the ground. But yeah, of course. I mean, even if they all would have made a different movie, even if it was the same script. But I mean, there's everything points to the fact that each one of them had like a different, if they even got far enough.
Yeah.
To actually like be actually working on it and not just be like in the running and discussions. The script changed so many times that, obviously it would have been a very different movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like Tony Scott at the time is doing, just coming off The Hunger, which is, I just watched that for the first time last year. And, that's a very different kind of Tony Scott than the Top Gun and everything after that version of Tony Scott. So I don't know what kind of movie he would have made here. Peter Hyams was very into the sci-fi kind of aspect of it. So really could have changed it and de-emphasized the love story and made it much more about the government chasing down the alien kind of aspect of it. But Carpenter comes in and he's really the one that emphasizes the love story and the road trip, setting of it. I think mostly comes from him.
Yeah. There was also, I don't know under whose authority, but apparently there was a draft at one point where the Starman flew.
Oh no.
Like Superman.
Oh no.
So I don't know what story that was, but apparently there was even a draft where that happened. So it's clearly went through many different into different directions and in different versions. But yeah, definitely Carpenter. I think it's a weird aspect. It's a weird time in Carpenter's career. He's coming off The Thing, which damn near ruined his career.
Which is just insane to think about from today, that movie could have gone over that badly.
He takes Christine because he just is afraid that if he doesn't make something right away, that he's not going to get another chance to make something.
Yeah.
And then we get Starman, and I mean, it's lucky for him that Christine did fairly well, box office wise.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day and before there were these Blu-rays with special features and commentaries and the internet and people talking, there was always this story that Carpenter's like agent or manager said, like, you got to make a nice movie. Like, you have to show people that you're not this quote unquote pornographer of gore, which is what he was kind of called when he made the thing. Like, you have to make a nice one, something like you have to let people know that you're not like crazy, and so like you have to do like
give them some soft edges.
And so that was always like what you heard as to why he did it. Now, in kind of reading everything I have for this episode, I couldn't find any, but I mean, he's not an open book.
Yeah.
Carpenter in general. So, I mean, who knows? But he was definitely in like a weird spot in his career. And so, like, luckily Christine did okay. He, for all intents and purposes, doesn't like that movie. It very much thinks of it as like a job.
Yep.
And unfortunately, like, Big Trouble didn't do very well after this one. But for this like weird moment in time, he's still willing to work with like a studio. He's probably scared that, you know, he can't afford to have another flop.
Yeah. This movie's crucial for him at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, according to him, like, he just got offered it. Like, he didn't, like, Michael Douglas like called him up and said, "Do you want to do it?" And he read whatever they had, and he was like, "Yes, like, I want to do something that's not a horror movie. I want to do something that's a road that has the potential to be a road movie and be a love story." Because he, like I was saying earlier, just has like other interests than horror movies. And but also, like, his son is born during production, and he doesn't leave production to go be there for the birth. It's also, I think, kind of like the beginning of the end of his relationship with Adrienne Barbeau. So it's like he's in a weird, when you read her book, he seems like this part of his career probably, and I think understandably so, like, really is afraid and feels like a failure during their relationship, because she's like coming off like a sitcom, like, you know, she was on Maude. She was like kind of a big, like, she was a bigger star than he was.
Yeah.
And you know, she did things because of him. Like, she did Creepshow because he's like, "Oh, you should work with George Romero," and she did Swamp Thing because you should work with Wes Craven. But you do get the sense from her book that, like, he is in constant, like, feels inferior in their relationship. Like, she's basically like the breadwinner, and he's trying to make movies, and he has this huge failure. And he's so afraid that he won't be back to work on Monday, back wherever they were, because they're not shooting in LA. I think the reason why like Prince of Darkness and LA and They Live become such LA movies, because I think he just wanted to be around for his, because he had a son now, and he didn't want to be off like in other places and not be around. And for the most part was able to shoot like 9 to 5 and be able to pick up his son from school and all that stuff. But at this point, I think he's just like in a really weird spot in his professional and also like his kind of personal life. And he comes back from this movie, and, you know, according to her, is kind of miserable. Like, she expected that he'd be like fucking psyched that he had a son, and he was, but he was at the same time, like, I don't know, like, just in a weird headspace. And then like a month later just said like, "Look, I don't want to be married anymore." You know, so it was like a month after returning from shooting this movie, he's just like, "I don't want to be married." And I met somebody, and though it's not romantic, we have a lot in common, and it just made me realize. And I wonder if that was Sandy King. I don't know like the trajectory of their relationship, because I know she basically then works on all his movies after that. So I don't know when that becomes an item. But so during Starman, he's certainly also in a very weird kind of like personal space and headspace in his personal life. So it's a very strange time for him.
It's a strange time to be making such a romantic film.
Yeah.
As he's falling out of love with his
romance is falling apart.
Yeah.
Shall I tell you what I find beautiful about you? You are at your very best when things are worst.
Yeah, I mean, as far as his career goes, totally see that he's really, it's really important to stabilize his career at this point. If he has another miss, I mean, I guess The Thing was such a disaster that alone could have sunk him, and thankfully, like, Christine kind of, stopped that downward slide, and then now he's got to try and go back up, which he is able to do for the most part here. But and it's interesting that he didn't get scared off by E.T. That E.T. comes out and that doesn't shelve this whole entire project, because it's got to be, I think the studio wanted similarities to E.T. but also wanted to change it enough so it's not just like an E.T. imitation. And I think a lot of people would have really struggled with that. And but he turned around and made an excellent film out of that.
Well, I mean, I think the success of AT is what finally like put it over the, got it over the hump to get made. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because the story, which I don't necessarily believe, things get said, especially in an internet age.
Wait, you don't believe the internet?
Podcast age. Things get said and then they just become truth. And it's like, you've always heard Carpenter say that, and when people write about it, The Thing, they say this, which is that like the reason why The Thing didn't do well is because E.T. came out like a week before and everybody wanted happy aliens, and Carpenter was giving them. So I don't buy that at all.
I don't know.
I don't know why that became the truth. That everybody just takes on on its as truth. It's a very weird notion that like that's the reason why that movie didn't do well. I do think that it is crazy. Could you imagine being in the cutting room, like cutting together The Thing and knowing what you have there, and then get that reaction from viewers, critics? Like, it could have broken him. Like,
it'd be so disheartening.
Like, you're making
devastating
what is probably going to be the best movie you've ever made, and nobody connects with it. And even now, like people will say like, but it grew. Now they'll say it, but it found its audience. He's like, well, what is good did it do me? Like, who gives a shit? Like, I needed them to like it then. Right. I don't care if they like it now.
I mean, think about if that had been the hit it should have been, where his career would have gone after that. Totally different trajectory.
I just can't imagine like seeing what you made. I mean, even like everybody's probably their worst critic, right? So like he probably didn't think it was as good as like, people think about it now, but he had to know it was something special in some way. Like,
how could you not?
Like that it worked. At the very least, he knew it worked.
Yeah.
Right.
And the fact that like people didn't see it that way had to just like, I can't imagine like how that could have screwed with like I don't think he thinks of himself as an artist, and I don't necessarily think a lot of people do. Like I've always thought of him as more of like a craftsman, but he is. And like artists are sensitive people. Mm-hmm. And like the fact that he came back from that at all is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And to then take a movie that like to sign on to Starman, which maybe he did Starman because of it. Like it's a movie that starts with an alien like crash landing on this planet who takes a human form.
Yeah, the same opening as The Thing.
It opens like The Thing does, and it's about an alien who basically, for all intents and purposes, like just clones existing characters to be in disguise. I mean, it's like the parallel universe version. It's like mirror version of of the Thing, or the Thing is the mirror universe version of Starman.
Yeah.
And maybe it was part of his motivation, was like, okay, well, like, you want a good alien, you want a good thing, I'll give you a nice thing, you know, like, I could do it.
Yeah. It's the Thing's cousin, okay?
But like, it's so Hollywood that like with his filmography, his resume, his pedigree of what he's done, it's like there's people with so much less than that that are given huge studio movies, blockbusters, like superhero movies or genre movies that are just like big budget things. And it is almost like, how did he not get the big ones, you know? But it is, you know, it's all about those relationships and like where he is within the system. And it's like, who likes you best and what have you done for me lately? And it's all those things. So he had to always been in the mix for some of the bigger things that ever came up. But you know, that's why we don't have 1989's Batman from John Carpenter or something, you know, like just somehow, I don't know. I mean, you know, it could have gone in so many different directions, but it probably went more in the direction that he's always wanted, I'm assuming, for himself.
Yeah, well, after Big Trouble in China, he just decides that he doesn't want to work for the studios anymore. He just like decides that it's not for him. And he doesn't seem like a guy that probably played well with executives.
I can't see that happening.
No.
Like, he talks about, you know, his working with Michael Douglas was the best relationship he ever had with a producer, but that's because Michael Douglas, he's like hired him and then at the end said, okay, it's good.
Yeah. See you at the premiere.
You know, who he had like one suggestion about, like, you might not want to, all the scenes seem pretty complete. You might want to come in late on some of the scenes, like come in mid scene. He's like, other than that, you know, you don't have to do it. And his other big suggestion was like, you should get Jack Nietzsche to score it.
Right.
And that was like, according to Carpenter, like the only feedback he got from Michael Douglas the whole time was like, it's good. I mean, you should get this guy to score it.
It's sad for me. It's sad for me to think that he looks at his career as like a disappointment. Cause like I don't know. I look at the movies that he's done and easily, you know, I think
who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want this career? You know, like,
well, I know. I mean, for me, I mean, just myself, like in my own personal bubble, like 4 of his movies are in my top 25, like of all time. Right. It's like, that's crazy. Like no other director has that many movies in my top 25. And I'd be hard pressed to find any kind of list of like cult movies anywhere where he doesn't have 5 movies on that list that are like squarely in the top tier of like cult movies all time. And it's just like, I understand cult movies aren't like immediate success and things like that, but like to be John Carpenter and think that he's like, you know, he's I mean, maybe he's not like this anymore, but like at a time it sounds like, you know, this is a little bit of a pity party, you know, like just having a hard time with how things were going. But like, man, like that's shocking to me, because like the stuff that he has done and the movies that he's put out there, and even the lesser known ones like Starman we're talking about tonight, like, dude, this guy makes great movies. Like,
but he had to wait like 25
so incredibly
years.
Rewatchable.
Yeah.
I mean, for some of them, yeah, for sure.
It took that long, decades for people to come around on him, though. So I can understand why he's, you know, was kind of bitter for a long time.
I totally get it. For me, like that time frame doesn't make sense, right? Because like I've been a fan of his since I first started seeing his movies. Like he's always been a guy who's made these movies that I love. Like and it wasn't until I got much older that it registered with me that like I was in the minority. Like there was not a lot of people, you know, not until, you know, like you were mentioning earlier, Blake, about, you know, the internet and like bringing like-minded folks together, you know, like I just assumed, oh, I liked it, everybody must like it, right? Because I was young and naive and didn't know any better. But no, that's not the case. So like he's always been like a directing, you know, genius, a top tier directing, You know, like he's always been in my top tier. And it just like blows my mind that like the only reason he's in anybody's top tier, or it seems, is because like of the cult stuff that's kind of come later on. But man, like,
yeah, on Saturday Night Movie Sleepovers, I always talked about like I became in like the late '90s. He was like one of these filmmakers that even though his name's above the title, you know, in all his movies, like I didn't put two and two together until In the Mouth of Madness, and then I saw that movie and it changed my life forever. And it's the reason why the Scored to Death books exist and all that. And but then I started to be like, well, what else did he do? And I was like, oh, like I love all of these movies.
Yeah.
You know, like They Live was on like every other week.
Absolutely.
On like Fox 23 in the Albany, New York area. And it was like, and I love that movie. And he made Big Trouble in Little China. I love that movie. And like Christine, like I remember Christine, and you know, Escape from New York was like, he's my favorite director, and I didn't even know it. So
exactly.
By the late '90s, when I was like becoming totally obsessed with him, when I talked to other people who were into movies, and even like John Carpenter, was like there was no love for the Fog at that time. There was like no love for They Live. There was like
you couldn't find Assault on Precinct 13.
Dude, I saw Assault on Precinct 13 when I was like 11 years old at late night on HBO, and I was like, this movie's awesome. But to your point, Blake, like you're right. Like I loved all these movies. I couldn't have told you that they were all directed by John Carpenter until I got a little bit older. But like the fact that I had seen all these movies and I loved every single one of them, and then found out it was the same guy who made all of them, it just blows my mind that he didn't have like just a major career and following, because all of these are like so good. They're all so good.
Yeah, I mean, totally. But like the Fog is what, like 80?
Yeah, 80. Yep.
And then
80.
like, so in like 97, 98, like all the people I know who love movies think The Fog is his crappy movie. And I mean, and maybe it's not one of his best movies, but like, that's like, oh no, like that one's bad. Like just straight up bad. And
It's
that like,
not.
and that They Live was like, you know, They Live, I think, has had a resurgence for other reasons. Probably for the same reasons that people thought it was bad in the late 90s, you know, like it's kitschy, you know, like there's no way around it. Like it's a particular flavor.
Yep.
And it took a lot of people to come to enjoy that flavor. But
now
They Live is probably like one of his most popular movies. Like you go see like retrospective screenings of They Live, and it's a packed house,
and they're all the time. It feels like, at least here in LA, like there's a They Live screening. It feels like every couple of months, you know, and it's like you said, packed.
Yeah, like it's taken forever, and then he became a rock star, and then it was like it just kind of like everybody got on the John Carpenter like bandwagon. Like everybody's on board now. Like now, you know,
it's just so,
you know, like my mom knows his name. Even though my mom watched those movies with me when I was in high school and stuff, she didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
But now like he's like almost a household name in the certain ways. Yeah, but like I think sadly, I think he does probably look back at his career with not total like pride and, you know, like being thrilled about the way it happened, about how it all went down. Like, I think he's probably for the most part, proud of the movies he made. But I don't know if those are all movies that like he would have chosen to make if the career went the way he kind of was hoping it had gone.
Yeah, because they're all reactions to the previous film or the couple of previous films. So
I just am like in shock. Like I'm sitting here looking at it, and every movie from Halloween, every like feature movie, not like I haven't seen any of the like I haven't seen Elvis, and I haven't seen Someone's Watching Me, the TV movies. Although I hear Elvis is pretty good, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
But like everything from Assault on Precinct 13 through Memoirs of an Invisible Man. I know I was joking about it earlier, but like when that movie came out, like I didn't know it was Carpenter, but I watched it a bunch and I remember enjoying it a lot. Like every single one of those movies are good. Like there's not a
Or
bad
great,
movie.
you know?
They're at least good.
Yeah.
At least good.
At a minimum.
You know, and okay, I haven't seen Prince of Darkness, but I'm watching that tonight. Like I've decided looking at this. I would say Body Bags is his first movie where I'm like, I don't know. That one I didn't really
But even
like
that was
much.
a TV. Those were TV movies.
Yeah, that's true. I would say his first not great movie was Escape from LA. For me. Like that's the first one that he does, and I'm like,
And you know what's funny for me? That I think that's the movie that really like brought my attention to Carpenter. When that came out was when I was like, oh, I've always heard of Escape from New York, but I hadn't seen it. So I saw that. I had already loved The Thing and Big Trouble and They Live. And then so I started going through his films again. And then same thing as you guys, like start putting it together like, oh yeah, the same guy made all these movies. I mean, I didn't love Escape from LA, but all the other ones I loved. So put all those pieces together. But he is proud of Starman. That's one of the ones that he has come back to, that he is proud of that one, and he's, and
he should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
yes. That's what I'm saying. He should be proud of all of them, though.
Yeah,
they're all good.
He probably is. He didn't set out to make bad movies, right? Nobody does that.
Yep.
So,
yeah. I mean, I think, like I said, I think he's proud of the movies he made. I think he likely holds some resentment for the fact that people love him now and they didn't love him then, and that his career could have been different had that happened. But he does get a chance to make like a fairly big budget, studio picture that's, not a horror movie, with a fantastic cast, and a solid script, and he delivers like a really great movie with Starman.
Now, about the cast, now, Jeff Bridges is such a fantastic performance here, and he's so immersed in it, and what he's able to do and take, like, I don't know if it's true or not, but what I had read was that he studied birds and used like bird mannerisms in that jerky way that he kind of moves his body, and that it's an alien trying to learn human mannerisms, and they're not going to have it down right in the beginning, but then by the end it's a little smoother, not totally. But I wonder what would this movie have been like if Kurt Russell had played Starman? And if Kurt Russell had played the Roddy Piper role in They Live. I was always curious, like, why did Kurt Russell not do They Live? It feels like a perfect movie for him. But this one too, I mean, he would have been obviously had more on his plate as far as, pure acting goes. But I don't know, what is there a reason why were they just doing different things at the time?
I don't know. I have heard rumor that Carpenter actually wanted Jeff Bridges to play MacReady in The Thing.
Oh, now that I can see too. No offense, Kurt.
Yeah.
But.
And I don't know why that didn't happen, but he ended up going back to tried and true Kurt. I think Kurt Russell didn't do They Live if he was offered it at all, or even if it was a thought to put Kurt Russell in it. I don't think he would have done it, because like by then he was like a kind of bona fide like movie star.
Yeah, he did Overboard, and Tequila Sunrise was that year, and it was on his way to Tango and Cash. So
yeah, like he was on his way to being like a big movie star at some point, and I just don't know if the budget was there for that movie.
Yeah,
and
true.
Why not Starman? I don't know if he was ever in the running for Starman. The as a studio picture, they probably were pretty insistent that they needed somebody who was kind of at that point a bigger stature than Jeff Bridges. There is the word was that they wanted Tom Cruise, which would have he would have been really young.
Really young.
Yeah, really young. When did Legend come out?
And that's the only reason why he didn't do it. Like Carpenter says he was fine with putting Tom Cruise in it. He met with Tom Cruise to talk about it. He liked Tom Cruise. He thought Tom Cruise would have been fine. but he was already contractually obligated to do Legend, which I think comes out in 85. But
Yeah.
Legend goes so over budget and over schedule that they would have had to have postponed production like a year to use Tom Cruise in Starman. So that's the reason why Tom Cruise is not in Starman. And I have nothing against Tom Cruise. I like Tom Cruise movies just fine, but I don't see Tom Cruise. It's hard to imagine Tom Cruise as Starman.
Well, yeah, I think what helps make this work is that Jeff Bridges is kind of like an average Joe kind of everyman kind of look. I don't know. I don't get that vibe from Tom Cruise, you know?
Yeah, and also Tom Cruise is coming off of like all the right moves.
And Risky Business.
And Risky
Business.
Like even if you cast someone younger than Karen Allen, like it changes the whole dynamic of the movie. I mean, clearly Karen Allen is not like an older actress in this, but like where she is at when we come into this story, like where she's at as a character in this is not someplace that like a 20-year-old woman or a 20-year-old, 21-year-old woman is at. It's like someone who has lived and has had this horrible thing happen to her.
Yeah.
This great loss that you don't, which happens to people, yes, like who are younger than she is here. But I think in terms of like storytelling in a movie, like it would have been very hard to tell this story that they tell it here with a younger cast than they have.
Well, it's more believable with a 30-something actress than a 20-something.
Exactly. Actress, right? Like, or even like 29 or 30.
Sure,
you need that runway of like, these two characters have had a relationship and they're embedded in each other's lives and they've done things and spent a lot of time together and they're really intertwined, so that when Scott is torn away, how devastated and lost that she is. And we get all of that from that opening scene with her.
Yeah. I mean, I think you already kind of said it, but I mean, that opening scene is, and it's tough because it's like it's not really the opening scene of the movie, but it is the opening scene.
But it is.
Well, first we get the opening.
It sets everything up, really.
First we have to have the opening of The Thing, and then we get
we have to have the Thing opening. But it's like the movie starts with her face watching these movies, and then it ends with her face like after this whole thing has happened. But like we don't need to know. What's brilliant about it is it's like some movies just hold your hand a little more than others. And Carpenter is a filmmaker that can trust that the audience will understand what's happening from like the first two shots that we see of her.
Yeah.
That like we understand. Like we learn later that he died in an accident. But like, and it's like more cemented just later in that scene. But you know instantly what's going on.
Yep.
And where she's at, who she is, and like where she is emotionally, and kind of what's happened.
Yeah, we don't need flashbacks, and we don't need all of that. We see one scene of the real Scott, and it's on that film with his patented red plaid shirt.
Yep.
And she's living in the past. She's like she's trapped in the past, and it's like another, it's not a videotape. It's a film, like Carpenter, like that's what memories are. It's an old crappy.
I mean, that's what memories were in '84, right? Like, I mean, I remember us looking at old family reels that same way when I was a kid growing up. It wasn't until probably '85 that we got our first like VHS-C camcorder and started,
recording everything.
Yeah, making home, like we made a home movie called The Color Monster. I'm sure everybody had their own version of The Color Monster where they made a scary movie of some sort. That was ours. Shout out to my brother who was The Color Monster.
Nice. But this opening, like I mentioned before, like I think all of us can identify with that, I think we all experience grief at some point in our lives, whether as a kid or as an adult, or someone in our family has passed away at some point. And so we know what that, what loss feels like. And that's, that's what's really at the core of this movie. And that now she's got a second chance to really deal with that and address that grief and process it. And, in reality, we don't really get that chance, but here she does. And it's so, it makes sense to me. Like when he shows up, the alien, the blue light comes in, and the one thing that probably the one thing that didn't age well in that movie is that when the light is looking at the picture album and you see Jeff Bridges kind of pop up out of the picture and do this rotation.
You don't like the bioscan effect?
It's like the smile. He's got like a smirk on his face. It was the one thing I was like, I would have done that differently. But
for me, it's
technology.
It's the sound effect of when like the balls come off the floor into his hand. Like that's It's like just like super cheesy, like, like fake computerized sound.
Yeah.
So when it takes the form of Scott, that she's shocked, but then of course, like she's automatically gonna sort of let her guard down and give this being an opportunity, right? As if it came and like stayed in its alien form, obviously she's just gonna run away screaming.
Yeah, well, he even says it later after she explains what like a little bit jumpy is.
Yeah.
He says like he basically tells her like I took this form so that you wouldn't be a little bit jumpy.
Yeah.
Like he knew well enough that he had to come as to something she recognized, or she wouldn't have helped him.
Yeah.
I mean, she still lost her shit at first, right? I mean,
of course. Yeah. But the two of them, their chemistry is so strong and they work so well together that through the whole, their whole road trip journey, because he has to get to a point in Arizona, right? Meteor crater. That
been there.
Me too. Me too.
Yep. Got pictures. Took pictures. I haven't been to the bottom. Not where
they
were.
I don't think you can go to the bottom.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
But they did.
Yeah. Well, it was 1980, 84. So
then they got
things were different
by an alien ship. That was the last trip down to the bottom.
Yeah. But he's got to get there within, was it 3 days?
Yeah.
Or like his physical body is just going to start dying.
Yeah. It's got Dark Man syndrome.
Dark Man syndrome.
That's right.
The flesh is not going to survive.
So yeah,
same ticking clock as ET. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah. No, there are definitely similarities between the stories.
I got a list of them. Just saying.
Well, 3 days is also, as a lot of these kind of alien science fiction movies are, like, 3 days plays into, Christ's resurrection and all that too. Like 3 days, 3 days is a popular number.
It's a popular number.
More JC references here.
That's right. So
the Jesus Christ cinematic universe. But I totally bought the journey of their relationship as we're along for the ride with them over these 3 days, that the chemistry between the two of them and the arc that it takes, that the scene with the deer and where she just kind of oversees him as he resurrects this deer, that he's not a violent, he's holding the gun for the first part of their road trip. So she's still considering him a threat. Obviously the whole thing is scary, but, he's literally pointing a gun in her face for a second. And, but by that point later on at the restaurant, that, the way she sees him revive this deer and let it run off to live again, I think that's the moment that really wins her over, because that's also where she's about to split and run off.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's definitely a change in her understanding of what his like intentions and what he's about are at that moment.
Yeah, she's at least willing to like, at that point, at least willing to see it through, right? See these like, I don't know, what it's going to be like when we get to Arizona, but I'll go with him.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's the resurrection of the deer, but then it's also the fact that he gets the crap kicked out of him. Is the other thing that I think makes her stay. But yeah, I mean, definitely the resurrection of the deer is. You're right, absolutely. It's kind of where she sees like, oh, okay, like he's like it's definitely safe, and that like he's so far beyond like hurting somebody that he's resurrecting things that have been hurt by somebody.
Yeah. Like he doesn't even understand like the purpose of the hunt and the hunter and all of that. Like he's just, that's just not part of his makeup. Obviously not where he's coming from. This isn't something that happens.
Yeah. Well, and he hasn't hurt her, right? He hasn't hurt her, and he's bringing this thing back to life. His fascination, the little details of his fascination with food, and like how in love with food he is. It's like all that wins her over again, and the fact that he's the image of her love.
What's the matter?
Stuffed apple pie.
Good.
It's terrific.
And I think that too, when he's getting beat up by the legendary Ted White, I don't think she could tolerate the sight of that without doing something about it, right? I think that's all things that factor in. I will say another actor that I have always loved that's in this movie is Richard Jekyll. I've loved that guy since
Who's that?
He's the George Fox, the government, the government guy who's trying to hunt them down. But I loved him in The Dirty Dozen, and he was in so many westerns in the 70s, and he's a great character actor that's in a million movies. Although I guess I probably had seen him as a villain before, but I always liked him. So I was like, oh, Richard Jekyll's in this. Okay, great. I'm even more on board now.
We also get a couple of Dirk Blocker, who plays one of the policemen that follows them to the motel. He's in Prince of Darkness, so he becomes kind of a little bit of the John Carpenter repertoire company for a short time, and of course the great Buck Flower, who I think is like in every John Carpenter movie after this one.
Is it? Yeah, it starts with this one, right? Because he's so obvious in all the other ones. He's got his beard, but here he's clean shaven. It's a little hard to spot, but he's giving Starman a ride at one point.
Yeah. Well, and MC Gainey, he's recognizable.
Yeah, he's the other cop. He's the other cop that I think he's the one that shoots Jenny.
Jenny
That's
Hayden.
right.
I mean, you have to say the full name.
Jenny Hayden, yeah. full name only. If only I could do that voice too. But
well, and the Charles Martin Smith, who from Untouchables and
from American Graffiti. And, he's another actor who was kind of all over the 70s and 80s, and then I think became a director.
To just pedal backwards just for a second, because we were talking about, we kind of got on this avenue of talking about the actors and stuff, and go because we started talking about, you were talking about Jeff Bridges' performance, and it was always kind of like legendary. And Carpenter, he kind of says it in the featurette for the Blu-ray, although he doesn't include himself in this, but it was always kind of notorious that because they shot the movie out of order, that like everybody on the crew, and it used to be, the story used to be Carpenter as well, but I can see it, maybe it's not, like really thought this movie was going to suck. Like really thought Jeff Bridges.
His acting was just like, what?
It was just like
so
awful.
extreme.
Like, they didn't know like what he was doing. And because they shot it out of order, like one day he's acting this way, and like another day he's acting this way, and like they didn't see like any kind of like continuity. Like it was like people were like behind the scenes, like like laughing at him
Like,
for
what
this
the hell?
performance. And I had always heard that Carpenter was also pretty worried, but when you hear the way it's talked about now, like it seems like Carpenter and Jeff Bridges did work pretty closely with how the performance, like what he was going to do. So I can kind of believe that Carpenter was kind of just like trusted Bridges and knew what he was going for. But yeah, apparently the crew was just like, what is he doing? And then once kind of like the movie was edited together, like they kind of realized that like he had planned it out, even though like yeah, like it's a subtle difference when you see it like all like laid out, but it really is like a big change.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like the way he does it, and like he just kind of he mapped it out scene by scene, like everything that he was going to do. Even when they shot the home video footage, like he's the one that made the faces. Like he knew like these are the things I want to mimic. Like it was like Carpenter wasn't like.
Did they shoot that first?
Yeah, they shot it.
It had to
like
be
a couple of weeks before.
Yeah,
they shot anything else, and they had apparently done like 2.5 weeks of rehearsal with him and Karen Allen. The first big chunk of it was primarily them figuring out like what Jenny and Scott's relationship was, and then then they went on to figure out what like her and Starman's relationship was, and like you had said, Jeff Bridges, he had kind of thought about it like a child. The bird thing is, I think, really clear once you kind of hear that he's kind of like the way he moves is very bird-like.
Yeah.
He also said he had a friend. He said when he makes movies, he like opens up his like phone book back then and looks at the people he knows, and he tries to think, in this case, like, who do I know who I wouldn't be surprised if I found out they were an alien? And it was this guy who was a dancer. And he was like, oh yeah, like, so he called that guy up and met with him, and it was a friend of his. And apparently they worked on a bunch of stuff together on the movement, and he would make videotapes of all these ideas and send them to Carpenter, and Carpenter would say, I like that. I don't like that. And so they kind of worked through it that way, which is like Bridges kind of did it on his own, but was like getting Carpenter's feedback the whole time. And Carpenter always said like how he kind of figured out the bird thing was on the script that Bridges had on set. He had he had drawn this big picture of a bird on like the title page. And Carpenter's like, oh, okay. like that's what he's doing.
Sure.
And I think, if you didn't say it already, which I think you did, like unfortunately, like the person who doesn't get the credit for the performance in this movie is Karen Allen.
Yeah.
Right.
Who's amazing.
Yeah. She's great.
She's so incredible. I don't know all of Karen Allen's films, but of the ones I've seen, like, this is her masterpiece. Like she's
so good. She keeps
so
the
powerful,
whole thing grounded.
Yep.
Like without her, like it's who we relate to as an audience member, right? Like going through this experience, like we're experiencing it from like the human perspective. And like her performance is like the thing that we grasp onto throughout this journey. And she's phenomenal.
And everybody knows her from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and which is also a great performance, but a very different kind of movie and much more, she can be much louder and much more, just a bigger performance, right? But what else? It's like there's Animal House, where she's a side character, really.
Cruising.
And Cruising, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, I think in the same universe as this movie.
Both.
This is after her character in Cruising leaves Al Pacino's character.
This is a sequel to Cruising.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, it's like we're seeing humanity and Earth through his eyes. but we're seeing the story through her. Like, but she's our conduit into the story at the same time.
Yeah.
It's really kind of like a brilliant juxtaposition in terms of just like storytelling, in that way. And he gives her like all the credit. He's like, I'm only, like she has to act against this, and I can only react to what she's doing. So, he gives her, a lot of the credit for the success of his performance. Also, the thing I didn't really think about till right now is like knowing, if people haven't watched the movie yet, spoiler alert, that she's impregnated by the end of the movie, and like the way she handles him a lot in the earliest, like, is kind of very maternal.
Yeah,
in
true.
A lot of ways.
Yeah, she's taking care of him, and
teaching him and explaining things to him like he's a child, because he is a child in that sense.
Right.
Yeah, and I think you really do buy the fact that she's fallen back in love with him by the end, that they've gone through that journey together, right? And that, she is, because at first when they're in the hotel and she starts to automatically like undress in front of him, she stops herself. And it's not too much later in the movie where, she accepts it and has fallen in love with this version of, I guess, this version of Scott. I mean, it's not really Scott, but it sort of is in a way. But, this Starman is like a beautiful being, a beautiful creature who cares about, life and people, and that they've fallen in love with each other. And I don't know, I think that it's so, all along the way, I think Carpenter, the way he handles it, and it's not so over the top, and like a lot of his films, he keeps it very simple and straightforward. That there's a lot of many other directors would add in, I need more of this and I need more of this, and we've got to, do something exciting here in the middle. It's like, nope, it's just a straightforward story for them, and it just feels like the best combination between Carpenter, Jeff Bridges, and Karen Allen.
Yeah, well, he shoots it. It's, other than maybe Prince of Darkness, which you guys will eventually see, it's like his least Carpenter looking movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's partially because like the way he shoots it is, there's a lot more, there are more close-ups than probably any other movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because like he knows that this movie, it's make or break with their performances.
Yeah. Well, it's super intimate, right?
And
like,
he has the trust that they, so it's like, it's all about what's going on in their faces and their eyes. And so in that sense, like, it is simple. Like, it's probably, it's a simple story in a lot of ways. And so he approaches it and just lets the story do what it needs and should do in that way. And
that's
right,
why we
intimate.
love Carpenter.
It's not just it's intimate in that most of it's in a car, a small intimate space, but it's also obviously intimate because it's this relationship.
Yeah.
In terms of what you were saying before, I've always been fascinated, and you start to see it more as you get older, obviously, or at least recognize it more, I think. It's like there's these little relationships that you have that just like only last for as long as they're going to last. It could be like sitting on the phone with like a tech person trying to help you fix your computer, and you're sitting on the phone with them for like 2 hours, and at the end you're like, hey, well, see you later, dude. and it's over. Or like I was on jury duty for like 4 days, and then you develop like a relationship, like this weirdly intimate relationship with like this group of people, and then it's over and you never see them again. And so in that way, like, I feel like even if he didn't look like Scott, like it's believable to me that like people could fall in love in 3 days, given like the circumstances, the close quarters, and the fact that he is kind of like this weird resurrection
right,
of her dead husband, just like seals the deal for me. You know, like, yes, it was believable. Like I totally bought it.
Yeah. Going back to the score, which I was shocked, by the way, to not see John Carpenter's name on that, on that credit. That I just assumed, and it does. There is a little bit of the Carpenter touch in that music, but it's a brilliant score. I mean, you're the score expert. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, well, it is kind of funny that, in a lot of ways, Morricone delivers a Carpenter score,
right?
At least the theme.
Yeah, for sure.
The main theme, and then this one. I mean, it feels like a Carpenter score in that it's synthetic, using the equipment of the time,
and the repetition of the theme,
that it's in a Carpenter movie.
Yeah.
When I interviewed Disaster Piece about the score for It Follows, I had gone back and I had listened to that score, and when that movie came out, everybody was talking about how that score was so Carpenter-esque. But when you really listen to that score, it's kind of not. I mean, it is, but it's really not as much as everybody was kind of making it out to be. But what I kind of discovered, and I talked to him about, was I think why people think it's so Carpenter-esque is because of the way it's used. It's not so yes, it sounds like Carpenter because it's a synthesizer, but really the sounds don't sound like him. The score itself doesn't sound like him. But the way the filmmakers used that music was very Carpenter-esque. And I feel like it's the least Carpenter movie, the way we think about Carpenter movies. But just by way of him placing the music where he wants it, I think makes it work in a Carpenter-esque way.
Yeah.
And it's a synth score using the same kind of equipment that him and Howarth were using for his other scores at that time. I forget his wife's name, but Jack Nietzsche samples his wife's voice, who was a singer, and plays it on the keyboard, and that's what we hear there. But Nietzsche was always kind of like this, like wacky composer. He did some other Jeff Bridges movie, coincidentally. I can't think of the title of it now, but he composed it using like wine glasses full of liquid, and like,
wow,
like rubbing
like crystal glasses, just like rubbing the brim.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways it is very Carpenter-esque, but in a lot of ways it totally isn't. There's nothing, I'm not saying anything profound about it, but it works. And that's
it's very powerful. I mean, especially the end. I mean, it totally had me. I was feeling all the feelings there at that final scene. But I mean, maybe a little bit over, because he uses that theme throughout the movie. Maybe just a little bit too much, but in hindsight, but still really powerful.
What I feel about Carpenter's movies, back when he was like a teenager, what's his name? Who's the Schrader? Paul Schrader wrote a book about transcendental cinema when he was like 19 or something. And he talks about transcendental cinema, about like there's 3 stages of a transcendental film, and the last stage is like stasis. And I've always felt like horror movies in general, but like Carpenter's movies, they kind of fall into like that structure. And like I always feel like the credits of a Carpenter movie are like the stasis, where everything's happened and you have to, like, as an audience member, you sit there with it.
Decompress a little.
When I watched it, this Starman this time, I was like totally gonna like flip over to the commentary during the credits to hear what they like them wrap up, but like with the music and the Carpenter font, like I just had to like sit there and be in that stasis at the end of this movie, coming off of that shot of Karen Allen, and just like sit with it until the credits were done.
Yeah. Like like I was saying earlier, a lot of his film, or almost all of them, have that really powerful final moment. And in a way, it's done differently but it's just as powerful in a very, much more emotional way than some of his other movies. But same thing. I just sat there and just like felt the feelings and let the entire credits run through with that score playing.
When I saw it at the retrospective films, like the theater screening, like I was a mess. Like I cried when he gives the speech about like what he likes about humans. I cried at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just like it just on the big screen with like an audience. Like it just like every bit of it just like worked. It just like he was playing me like a fiddle, that John Carpenter. In that instance. Like I was totally just like into it, and it just all hit me the way like I would assume he wanted it to.
And I love how it is that bittersweet ending. I was very worried watching it, really for the first time that and it's not very Carpenter to do this, but like, was he going to get on his, because it's his planet, it's his whole planet that comes down and scoops him up, right? Like that's not
I don't
something
think
like
so.
It's unclear.
Okay.
It's unclear. I think it's just a big sphere, like the ones he holds in his hand.
Got it.
And what we're seeing is the reflection of the
crater,
and the sky.
Got it.
In like what I would assume is like this metallic sphere, or some other, non-Earth element.
But I was a bit worried. I'm like, are they going to kill him like right as he's getting away, like so many other Hollywood movies would do? And thank God, no, we got.
She gets scooped up into a lab at the end of this movie.
Oh yeah, she's gone. She's done.
She doesn't keep that baby. That thing is ripped out of her stomach.
Well, there was a TV series.
This got dark.
But I think just a beautiful ending for a beautiful movie. Should we let's talk a little box office and see how it did at the financially with a little box office glory.
Nice.
Starman is released on December 14th, 1984. It had a $24 million budget, which feels huge.
Yeah, it was that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you do have, you have some special effects with ILM and Stan Winston does some work here. And so.
Yeah, you get Dick Smith, Stan Winston, and Rick Baker do that. It's like the dream team of special effects.
Really is.
Transformation. For, I don't know about now because they've now moved, but in Queens, there was the Museum of the Moving Image. And they had on display one of the times when I went there, like the different heads of the transformation.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, wow.
Like, were like on display. And I was like, that's random. Like,
wow.
like Starman.
Yeah, very random.
Starman,
but pretty
heads.
awesome.
Awesome, but random. Like that's the on display.
I love that they had to fill up shelf space for 40 years. Like, like,
yeah.
Like, all right, well, finally we'll put it in the museum. Like, or, put it the
They were saying on the commentary too, with Carpenter and Jeff Bridges that they had made like a full-size penis on that animatronic, and that's why the leg is up. He's when it's laying there, his like leg is up, blocking
the genitals.
Yes, and they were like, "Why did you make that? Like, we can't see that." I don't know. It's funny,
but
it's also funny because it would have. Yeah, I just imagine like because that figure that grows with the legs up, it like starts as a child.
Yeah,
and then so it's like. Is it like a man-sized genitals?
We'll never know. We'll never know.
But someone had to spend 3 days sculpting it and making sure it matched the skin tone, and
then it grew as the body grew. Yeah. Anyway, okay, so it debuts at number 6 that week. Against other new films that week were Dune, The Cotton Club, and the Tom Selleck classic Runaway with the mechanical spiders at the end.
With the little mechanical spiders.
Yeah.
Frightening movie to me.
Gene Simmons in that movie?
Gene Simmons is the villain.
I think we talked about doing we got to put that one on the list.
Runaway, we'll hit Runaway at some point.
It's come up on the show. Yeah,
it's an important film. And it lands, right between Cotton Club and Runaway. It had a $2.8 million opening weekend for a total domestic run of 28.7. So made a little bit of money there. Not a huge hit, but it didn't lose money.
That would have run right through this, like until like May or June. Like that would have run the entirety of the winter and spring.
Yeah. Well, it was fairly consistent because I think for a few weeks it stays at that 6 or 7 spot. So at least it didn't really dip for a while. But it was up against Beverly Hills Cop, Dune, and City Heat were the top 3 that opening weekend, and it ends up at number 29 of 1984. Between the Gods Must Be Crazy and Cannonball Run 2. But it's a tough, Brent, like you mentioned, that's a tough field in 1984. Temple of Doom,
a lot of competition. Of competition.
Ghostbusters, Beverly Hills Cop, Temple of Doom all topped out 1984. So yeah, did okay. I think he seemed moderately happy with it. I'm sure he would have loved it to have done better, but it didn't continue a downward trend for him. So at least it did what he wanted, and it stabilized him. They've talked about, so there was a 1-season Starman TV series, which I was unaware of. In all my 80s TV knowledge, I missed the Starman show. Automan,
I remember
watched, but
I remember it, but I don't think I watched it.
I remember it as well. I always got it. It's linked very closely with, was it Sidekick? There was a movie with like a kid,
Karate Kid,
martial arts.
Sidekick. Yeah,
with Chuck Norris.
Chuck Norris.
No, not that's a movie. Nope. There was a television series.
Yeah, like 86 or 87 was Sidekick. Yep, I had a couple episodes on VHS.
But if anybody wants to watch the series, it's currently on Crackle.
Oh, it is
Starman the series.
And
it's about the son is a teenager, and I'm assuming that
Scott is a teen. Scott is the son, right?
Scott Jr. as the son, but yeah, he's not I can't remember the guy's name. It's late here in New York.
Robert Hayes, right? Is
Robert
the actor
Hayes.
in it? Yeah.
Like he's not Scott in it. Like the alien comes down and takes the form of another dead.
Yeah.
This journalist who died in a helicopter accident. At the time that the alien comes down to Earth, so he takes his form.
And Jenny Hayden's not in the show. It's just about.
No, I want to say she's dead.
I looked into it, and I think she shows up in like the last episode. They find her, and she's like gone off the radar, but she is alive.
He's like at some like prep school, sleep like he's off at school. And I'm sure, I don't know the wacky adventures they get into, but I'm sure they're wacky.
I'm sure they are. It had to be. It sounds like Jeff Bridges and Karen Allen have talked about wanting to do a Starman 2. It sounds like Carpenter's very fascinated, but also wants nothing to do with it.
Happy to get a paycheck if possible.
Yeah.
But doesn't want to work on it.
They talk about it on the commentary on the Blu-ray, and Carpenter was just like, oh, that sounds great. Let me know what happens with it.
So there was going to be a remake. For a while they were working on a remake that got reported in the Hollywood Reporter like way back in 2016, but
with John Goodman and Leah Remini.
Nope, not at all. But
it would be interesting though. Yeah. Would be interesting to see. Maybe it's a little too late now, but it would have been interesting to see a Starman 2 and with a Starman coming back, and I don't know. Is there more story there? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think it's about the son. He's supposed to grow up to be this big teacher.
Yeah.
And now he'd be like, 35 or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm no mathematician, but
if the Ghostbusters can come back, let's get Starman back.
How did David Bowie's Starman not make it into the soundtrack of this movie? By the way, that was like 10 years prior, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they were able to get a Rolling Stone song, which I can't imagine was any harder than getting or any easier than getting a David Bowie song.
I feel like you can get Bowie in '84 without too much of an issue. Oh well.
Yep.
He was too busy doing Labyrinth.
Just to wrap it up, I don't know. I think this is really skyrocketed on my John Carpenter list. So I'd say it's in my top 5 now.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I need a little more time to like lay out exactly. I mean, the Thing's still number 1 for me, but Starman's probably 4 or 5 for sure.
Wow.
It is good.
It's one of my favorite It's one of my favorite John Carpenter movies, and John Carpenter is my favorite filmmaker. So it definitely ranks pretty high for me too. It works.
Yeah, and I think on a rewatch too, like I watched it twice, not in a row, but in back-to-back days, and I felt even more invested in it the second time. So I feel like it's a movie that's got a shelf life for sure.
Yeah. It's good. It's rewatchable for sure. I think it still resonates. Like people could, if you've never seen it before, you could watch it. And there's nothing like in this that's egregious that takes you out of it that, like dates it so much other than the fact that there's, no cell phones and things of that nature. But it's still a great story, great performances, easily digestible, totally worth watching.
Yeah. If you like movies like E.T. and The Terminator and The Matrix and Shrek, all of those movies, this is right up your alley. So get on board.
Well, Blake, tell us what's going on with everything in the world of Scored to Death. What's happening in your world?
Well, I'm in the middle of making a documentary based on the Scored to Death books. For people that don't know, I have 2 books out: Scored to Death, Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers, and Scored to Death 2, More Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers, which are in-depth interviews with film music composers who have made significant contributions to the horror genre, including John Carpenter, who's in the first book. And I'm in the middle of making a documentary that is going to be not so much a documentary version of the books, but kind of a companion piece that's going to focus more on how music works in horror movies. So we're in the middle of doing that, shooting that, and working on a companion. The movie is a companion to the books. I'm working on a music album that's a companion to the movie, which is very close to going to the vinyl plant pressers.
Wow.
Having not ever done it before, there's just like every time I think I'm done, I'm like, oh, I need to fill out this form, or like, oh, the artwork needs to be done this way and this color space and all that stuff. So in an effort to make sure that I get everything done correctly, it's going a little bit slower than I was hoping it would. But it's a collection of horror movie theme songs covered by an assortment of composers and musicians, including Alan Howarth. Doesn't really do a cover, but he takes an existing track that he did for a more recent horror movie and kind of does a new edit of it for the album. But we have a very interesting collection of themes ranging from Stepfather 2 to stuff from Day of the Dead.
Nice.
Richard Christie, who's a drummer, but he also works on the Howard Stern Show. He covered a track from The Fog, a Carpenter track. So doing that, it's doing it for people who gave money to the Kickstarter campaign to raise money for the movie, but we're going to have many copies extra that I will figure out a way to make them available, probably through Bandcamp when it's done. And then like the Kickstarter account, kind of like all the proceeds for that will go into the movie. And I do a podcast on occasion called Score to Death Radio, where I do an assortment of things. Sometimes, most of the time, I'm just kind of a DJ, and I play film music cues, usually horror, but having now dedicated like a decade of my life to horror film music, the next couple of episodes are actually dedicated to movie theme songs from the 70s and 80s.
Oh,
very nice.
Some horror, but also some other things, a lot of adult contemporary sounding stuff.
Gonna change it up a little.
Some dance music, some of course Stan Bush needs to make
God, yeah.
And that's all Scored to Death. And Saturday Night Movie Sleepovers, Dan and I are occasionally still doing episodes. Not as much as we used to, but we're working on quarterly. That's the plan. We try to deliver one every quarter.
And each of our respective shows has recently released a Dead Heat episode. So for all the Dead Heat fans, you can check out both of our shows.
That's right.
That's great, man. You got a lot going on, and we're always cheering you on for all the projects that you have.
We are
going on.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
And we're always honored to have you come on, and especially talking about John Carpenter. And I think you'll be back here sooner rather than later, as we're heading directly as this drops into our Shocktober programming. So we've got some Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween stuff coming up. So that'll be fun to get you back for one of those. So looking forward to that.
I'd love to. It's always a good time.
Nice. All right, and you can check us out. We're ReconCinemation Podcast on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and check out our back archives at ReconCinemation.com. Drop us a 5-star rating and a review. It always helps the show, and we appreciate it very, very much. Quick thank you to our friends E.K. Wimmer for the theme music and Curtis Moore for the poster. And we will see you next time for the beginning of our Shocktober episodes.
Perfect.
Bye now.
Take care.
See ya.